The grand piano in the middle of the golden hall gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. Every guest at the billionaire's mansion stood in awe, waiting for the moment that would decide a man's fate. Marcus, the janitor, stood at the edge of the room, holding his old mop, his clothes smelling of polish and sweat. He had cleaned this hall every day for years. But tonight he stood there for something else, something no one expected. The host of the evening, Mr. Roland King, was one of the richest men in the city, known for his arrogance and pride. He believed that wealth could buy anything, even love. His daughter, Alina King, however, had a gentle heart and loved music more than money. She had told her father that she would only marry a man who could move her heart through the piano. Not through his fortune. Roland had laughed and turned her promise into a joke before his guests. "If anyone can play this piano and make my daughter cry with emotion," he declared, "I will let her marry that man." The guests laughed with him, confident that no one in the room had such talent. To them, it was just entertainment, a joke between the rich. But then came a soft voice from the corner. "May I try, sir?" All heads turned. It was Marcus, the janitor, standing nervously, his hand still holding the mop. The room burst into laughter. A janitor playing a piano in a billionaire's mansion. It sounded like madness. "Do you even know what a piano is worth?" One man mocked. Another added, "Go back to your broom." "Boy." Alina looked at Marcus curiously, her heart feeling something different. She had often seen him quietly humming while cleaning near the music room. Something about his eyes showed he wasn't joking. Before her father could refuse, she softly said, "Let him try." The room fell silent. Marcus walked slowly toward the piano, his footsteps echoing across the marble floor. He touched the edge of the instrument gently. As if greeting an old friend, he closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes were soft, uncertain, like the whisper of rain on glass. But soon they grew stronger, deeper, more alive. His fingers danced over the keys with a grace that came not from training, but from soul. Each note carried the pain of struggle, the beauty of dreams, the voice of a man who had lived in silence too long. The laughter faded. Even the sound of champagne glasses stopped. Every eye in the room was on Marcus, every heart caught between disbelief and wonder. Tears began to form in Alina's eyes as the melody spoke of loneliness, of hope, and of faith that never died. She had never heard anything like it, not from any of her father's guests, not even from the best pianists money could buy. When Marcus finally finished, his hands trembled. He looked up to see the entire hall frozen. For the first time, Roland King had no words. The same man who had laughed now stood silent, humbled before the janitor's gift. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then thunderous, but Marcus didn't smile. He simply bowed his head, whispered, "Thank you," and began to walk away. "Wait," Alina said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. Marcus turned, his eyes unsure. She walked toward him, tears on her cheeks, and said, "You made my heart cry." The crowd gasped. Roland's face turned pale, realizing the promise he had made. That night in the Golden Mansion, a janitor reminded the world that talent has no class, and as Alina stood beside him, everyone knew this was just the beginning of a story no one would ever forget. The mansion was quiet that night, long after the guests had gone. The echo of the piano still lingered in the air, haunting and beautiful. Marcus sat alone on the stone steps outside, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time in years, he had played not for himself, but for the world to hear. He looked up at the stars, remembering his mother's words. "Son, music is not about money. It's about telling your story without saying a word." Those words had guided him since childhood. Through every struggle and every lonely night, he had lost his parents early, and with them his dreams. Life had pushed him into cleaning jobs, odd work, and long nights with empty stomachs, but his love for the piano never left him. Whenever he passed by the small music shop downtown, he would pause just to listen. The shop owner, an old man named Mr. Benson, had once allowed him to play after closing hours. "Your hands have something rare. Boy," he used to say, "don't ever stop playing. No matter what the world tells you." Marcus didn't know that inside the mansion, Alina couldn't sleep either. She sat by her window watching the same stars, her heart full of questions. Who was that man who played like an angel trapped in a human body? How could someone who cleaned the floors play better than the teachers her father hired? The melody still echoed in her heart, each note pulling at something deep inside her. The next morning, when Marcus arrived at work, everyone stared. The staff whispered, some with awe, some with jealousy. "Did you hear what he did last night?" One maid said he made the guests cry. Another added, "The boss looked like he swallowed his pride whole." Marcus just smiled quietly and went back to mopping the floors. He didn't crave attention, he just wanted peace. But peace wasn't what was waiting for him that day. Roland King called for him in the grand study. The old man sat behind his massive desk, his face unreadable. "So you can play?" Roland said slowly, his voice heavy. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. His tone humble, Roland leaned forward. "Where did you learn? Who trained you?" Marcus hesitated, then said softly, "No one trained me, sir. I learned by ear." Roland frowned. "You mean to tell me you never had a teacher?" Marcus nodded. "Only life, sir. Life was my teacher." For a moment, the billionaire didn't know what to say. He had spent millions on lessons for his daughter, yet this janitor played with a heart no tutor could teach. Finally, he said, "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you embarrassed my guests. You made me look like a fool." Marcus bowed his head. "That was never my intention, sir. I only played because your daughter asked me to." Roland's eyes narrowed. "And what do you expect now? A reward?" Marcus shook his head. "No, sir. I expect nothing," and with that he turned to leave. But as he reached the door, Alina appeared, holding a small old photograph. "Father," she said gently, "do you know who this is?" Roland glanced at the picture and froze. It was a photo of his late wife, holding a little boy beside an upright piano. "This boy," Alina said softly, "is Marcus." Roland's breath caught, memories flooding back years ago before his wealth. His wife used to give piano lessons at a small community center. She had often spoken of a boy with a natural gift, a boy who could play without notes, but Roland had never met him, until now. Marcus looked confused. "Your mother was Mrs. Evelyn King." Alina nodded. "She was your teacher once, wasn't she?" Marcus smiled faintly, tears forming. "She was my angel. She taught me that music comes from the soul, not from books." Roland sat back, silent for once, his arrogance slowly melting into shame. He realized that the same boy his wife had once believed in now stood before him, mopping his floors. The air grew heavy with emotion. Alina placed her hand on Marcus's arm, her eyes kind. "My mother always said her best student disappeared one winter. She searched for you," Marcus whispered. "I never forgot her, Miss Alina. She gave me hope when I had none." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Roland cleared his throat. "Marcus, from today you're not a janitor anymore." "Report to the music hall," Marcus blinked, unsure. "Sir?" Roland looked away, hiding the softness in his eyes. "I need a new music instructor, and it seems you're already qualified." Marcus smiled humbly. The first real smile in years outside, the morning light touched the piano room where everything had begun. The melody of fate was still playing, and this time, it promised a new beginning for them all. The grand piano room glowed softly under the morning light. Dust danced in the air as Marcus stood quietly, his reflection shining on the polished surface of the piano. It still felt unreal. Just yesterday he was mopping floors, and today, he stood here as the new music instructor. His heart beat fast, not from fear but from the weight of destiny. As his fingers touched the keys, he felt his past return. Every note carried a story, one of hunger, struggle, and faith. He closed his eyes and began to play, filling the room with a melody that spoke more than words ever could. It was calm, warm, and full of longing, like a whisper from the soul. Alina entered quietly, standing near the door. She didn't want to disturb him, she just wanted to listen. The way he played reminded her of her mother, gentle, emotional, and pure. Her eyes softened, realizing this man's heart was far richer than any of her father's guests. When the song ended, Marcus turned and smiled faintly. "Miss Alina," he said, "I didn't hear you come in." She smiled back. "I didn't want to interrupt." Her voice trembled slightly, and Marcus could feel the sincerity in her tone. "You play like you're telling a secret," she said softly. Marcus looked at the piano and replied, "Maybe I am. Maybe every note hides something words can't say." Alina stepped closer, her gaze gentle yet curious. "What kind of secrets?" she asked. Marcus took a slow breath and said, "Dreams, regrets, things we wish someone understood." Their eyes met for a brief second, and the silence between them felt alive. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy with emotion, as if the air itself carried a melody only they could hear. But before anything could be said, the door creaked open. Roland King walked in, his expression serious as ever. "Ah, practicing early," he said, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Marcus stood straight. "Yes, sir, I wanted to prepare for the afternoon class." Roland nodded but kept his gaze fixed on Marcus. "I hope you remember this is not a charity," he said. "You'll be judged by your results." Marcus nodded respectfully. "I understand, sir." After Roland left, Alina sighed quietly. "I'm sorry about my father," she said. "He's just not used to being wrong." Marcus smiled kindly. "It's all right, Miss Alina. Some lessons take time, even for the powerful." Alina's lips curved into a small smile. Impressed by his calm wisdom over the next few weeks, the mansion came alive with music again. Marcus began teaching piano to children from nearby communities, invited by Alina. The laughter of children echoed through the halls where silence once ruled. Even the staff began humming tunes while working. The atmosphere turning softer, warmer, Roland observed this change silently, pretending not to care, but sometimes, when no one was around, he would stand near the doorway and listen. Something about Marcus's playing reminded him of his late wife, the only person who could calm his pride. And for the first time in years, he began to miss her, not with anger, but with peace. One evening, as the sun set over the mansion, Alina walked into the music room again. Marcus was there, fixing a broken piano string. His hands gentle and patient, she asked quietly, "Do you ever miss the world outside, Marcus?" He smiled faintly. "I live in music, Miss Alina. The world outside feels distant now." She tilted her head. "Then maybe you need someone to remind you it's still beautiful." Her words lingered in the air, sweeter than any song. Marcus looked up, his eyes soft but cautious. "Some beauty," he said slowly, "is dangerous for men like me." Alina's heartbeat quickened. "And what kind of man are you?" she whispered. He hesitated. "One who knows where he belongs and where he doesn't." But the truth was, even as he said it, his heart betrayed him. Every time Alina smiled, it felt like a sunrise breaking through his long nights. He didn't dare show it, yet his music began to change. Each piece he played grew more emotional, more personal, like confessions made through melody, and Alina felt it too. Every time she heard him play, she felt drawn to him, not just as a musician, but as a soul who had lived what he played. There was a pull between them neither could explain. Love had begun to bloom quietly in the halls of the mansion, hidden behind piano keys and unspoken glances. One night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Marcus stayed back in the music room. He played a soft tune that sounded like a heartbeat. Slow and steady, Alina, walking past, paused at the doorway, listening as she watched him lost in the rhythm. She realized something, and she wasn't just hearing music. She was hearing his heart, and somewhere deep inside, she knew her own heart had already started answering it. The night air outside the mansion was still, heavy with the scent of jasmine. Inside the music hall, candles flickered softly. Throwing golden light across the piano keys, Marcus sat alone again, his hands resting motionless on the instrument that had become his voice. Something inside him stirred, a mixture of longing, courage, and fear. He had spent weeks teaching others, hiding his emotions behind gentle smiles. But tonight felt different, as if the piano itself wanted to speak for him. He opened the lid slowly and pressed a single key, letting the sound linger. That single note grew into a melody, low, deep, and filled with a quiet ache. Each note rose like a confession, every chord a heartbeat that refused to stay silent. It was the sound of love discovered too late, of feelings that shouldn't exist yet couldn't be denied. He called the piece Alina's song, though no one knew it yet. It carried her laughter, her kindness, and the light she had unknowingly brought into his world. Upstairs, Alina lay awake, unable to sleep. She had heard the faint music drifting through the halls. Something about it called to her, like the pull of destiny, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She quietly followed the sound down the corridor. When she reached the door, she paused. Marcus was there, lost in the melody, his face lit only by candlelight. His eyes were closed, his expression soft, almost sacred. The music flowed from him like a river, pure, endless, unstoppable. Alina's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of something far deeper. Every note spoke what neither of them had dared to say aloud. When the last chord faded, she whispered, "That was beautiful." Marcus turned sharply, startled, then smiled faintly. "I didn't see you there." "Miss Alina," she stepped closer, her voice trembling. "What do you call that song?" Marcus hesitated, then answered quietly, "It doesn't have a name yet." Alina smiled. "Then let me name it. Call it the song that changed everything." Her words struck him, not as poetry, but as truth, for he already knew his life would never be the same. They stood there in silence, hearts speaking louder than words. But the moment broke when the door creaked open again. Roland King entered, his expression dark. He had been walking the corridors, restless when he heard the music too. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice echoed sharply. Slicing through the tenderness in the room, Alina stepped forward. "Father, Marcus was just playing." "I can hear that," Roland interrupted, his eyes narrowing at Marcus. "I hired you to teach, not to serenade my daughter," he snapped. Marcus lowered his gaze. "Forgive me, sir." "I meant no disrespect." Roland's anger burned deeper, fed not just by pride but by fear. He had seen the look in his daughter's eyes, the same look his late wife once gave him when love was young and foolish. "You will stop these private performances immediately," Roland ordered. Alina's voice rose, trembling with emotion. "Father, please. It's just music." "No," he said firmly. "Music is only harmless until it makes people forget their place." Marcus stood quietly, absorbing each word like a wound. Finally, he bowed and said softly, "As you wish, sir." After Roland left, the silence between Marcus and Alina felt heavier than ever. Tears welled in her eyes. "He doesn't understand." Marcus gave a faint smile. "He's protecting what he loves, even if it hurts others." She shook her head. "He's wrong about you." Marcus looked away. "Maybe. But sometimes right and wrong sound the same when played on different keys." She wanted to say more, but words refused to come. Instead, she reached out, placing her hand gently over his for a moment. Their fingers touched, brief, electric, unforgettable. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Marcus staring at the piano, the instrument that had given him everything and taken everything in return. That night, Marcus packed his few belongings and left the mansion quietly before dawn. He couldn't bear to bring shame or trouble to the woman who had shown him kindness. As he walked down the empty road, the cold wind brushed his face. Behind him, the mansion loomed like a dream fading into the morning mist, and though he carried nothing but a small notebook of melodies, in his heart one song remained, the song that changed everything, a song that would soon travel farther than he ever could imagine, a song born from forbidden love, destined to echo beyond walls, beyond pride, beyond time. The city woke slowly under a pale gray dawn. Vendors rolled open their carts, the smell of bread and dust filling the air, and among the noise of morning life walked Marcus, a man carrying nothing but a worn coat and a pocket notebook filled with songs. He had left behind the marble floors, the chandeliers, and the mansion's golden piano, yet somehow his heart felt both heavy and free. He walked until his feet brought him to an old square he once knew. There, in a forgotten corner, stood a broken upright piano, half covered in peeling paint. It had been his friend once, years ago, when he played for coins and dreams. He touched the cracked wood gently, whispering, "Still waiting for me, huh?" A soft wind blew as if answering him. The keys were yellowed, some missing, some out of tune. But to Marcus it was perfect. He sat down and began to play, quietly at first, then louder as the melody grew stronger. The same tune that once filled the mansion now filled the streets. The song that changed everything danced through the morning air, wrapping around strangers who stopped to listen. People gathered, shopkeepers, children, old women carrying baskets. They had never seen anyone play with such feeling. Each note carried warmth, sorrow, and hope all at once. A little boy dropped a coin at his feet, and then another followed soon. The small crowd began clapping in rhythm, drawn into his magic for the first time in many days. Marcus smiled. He didn't have a home, but he had something greater, music that belonged to everyone. As the sun climbed higher, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. It was Mr. Benson, the old music shop owner who had once believed in him. "Marcus," the old man said, his eyes shining, "I thought the city had swallowed you whole." Marcus laughed softly. "Almost did, but I found my way back." Benson looked at the piano, shaking his head. "Still playing that broken beauty, eh?" Marcus nodded. "She's never let me down." The old man sighed. "You were born for more than sidewalks, my boy." Marcus looked toward the sky. "Sometimes the streets hear better than the rich ever will." Days turned into weeks. and Marcus became a quiet legend in the market square. People began calling him the street maestro. His music drew crowds from nearby towns. Even local newspapers wrote about the mysterious man whose piano could make people cry and smile in the same song. He never revealed his past, not the mansion, not Alina, not the pain. He simply played, letting the music speak for him. One afternoon, as he played a slower, sadder version of Alina's song, he noticed a car stop near the crowd. A chauffeur opened the door, and out stepped a woman in white. Her face hidden behind sunglasses, Marcus froze, the notes faltering. But when she removed her glasses, his heart nearly stopped. It was Alina. She stood still for a moment, her eyes glistening with tears. The crowd parted around her, sensing something unspoken. She walked closer until she was right beside him. "You left without saying goodbye," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus kept his eyes on the keys. Goodbyes are easier when you don't look back. Alina knelt beside the piano. "I looked for you, Marcus, for weeks." He shook his head gently. "You shouldn't have." She smiled sadly. "You think running away protects people, but it only hurts them more." The music faded as silence fell again. People around them stood quietly, watching a story unfold they didn't understand. Finally, Marcus said, "Your father wouldn't have allowed this." Alina replied softly, "My father isn't the man he was, Marcus." She took a deep breath. "He heard you play on the radio last week. Someone recorded your song here in the square." Marcus looked up. Shocked, "He didn't know it was you," she continued. "When he heard it, he cried. He said it reminded him of my mother." Marcus's hands trembled. The weight of fate pressing on his chest, he whispered, "Then maybe the song reached where words never could." Alina nodded, tears gliding down her cheeks. "He wants to see you." Marcus stared at her. "Unsure, please," she said softly. "Not as a servant or a musician, but as the man who brought music back to our home." The crowd clapped suddenly. Thinking the performance had ended, Marcus looked at Alina, the sound of applause echoing around them. He smiled faintly and said, "Seems like the streets have spoken." Alina smiled through her tears. "Then let them witness what comes next." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Marcus closed the piano lid gently. The crowd dispersed, leaving behind a few coins and countless hearts touched by his song. He looked at the mansion's silhouette in the distance and whispered, "Maybe it's time to play there once more." For the first time, the journey back didn't feel heavy. It felt like destiny, waiting to finish the melody it had begun. The black car moved slowly along the winding road that led back to the King Mansion. The evening sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, the same colors that had once lit the music hall. Marcus sat quietly in the back seat, his heart beating to the rhythm of the tires against the gravel. Beside him sat Alina, her hands clasped together, her eyes fixed ahead as if afraid to blink. It had been months since he last saw those tall white gates. When he left, he thought he would never return. Yet life had written another verse for him. The mansion came into view, grand, silent, and heavy with memories. The guards opened the gates at Alina's nod, and the car rolled in slowly. When Marcus stepped out, the scent of roses hit him instantly. The garden was just as he remembered, trimmed to perfection, but somehow colder. He glanced toward the music hall's window, where once the sound of his playing had filled the air. A deep breath steadied him as he whispered, "Back to where it all began." Roland King was waiting at the entrance, his posture straight, his eyes unreadable. Age had softened him, but the air of authority remained. When Marcus approached, Roland spoke first, his tone firm but calmer than before. "You've changed the world outside, Marcus," he said slowly. "Now let's see if you can change mine." Marcus bowed slightly. "Sir, I never meant to challenge you. I only wished to play what I felt." Roland nodded faintly. "And yet, what you played has followed me every night since you left." He turned toward the doors. "Come in, both of you, dinner is ready." It was not a command this time, it was an invitation. Inside, the mansion felt different. The same paintings hung on the walls, but the silence carried warmth instead of pride. Marcus looked around, realizing that even places can forgive. They ate together in quiet conversation, the tension melting away between clinks of silver and glass. After dinner, Roland led them to the music room. The grand piano stood in its familiar place, shining softly under the chandelier. "Play for me," Roland said, His voice almost gentle, Marcus hesitated. "What would you like to hear, sir?" Roland looked at his daughter and said, "The one that made me remember my wife." Marcus understood immediately. He sat down, fingers trembling slightly, and began to play the song that changed everything. The melody flowed through the hall. Rising and falling like a heartbeat, Alina closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her face. Roland stood still, every note peeling away years of pride and grief. He saw not just a janitor, but the same boy his wife once spoke about, the boy who played with his soul. When the song ended, silence wrapped the room. Roland took a deep breath and said, "Your music brought my family back to life." "Marcus!" Marcus lowered his head, unsure what to say. Roland stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly, "and I was wrong about what truly matters." Marcus looked up, his eyes moist. "Music only finds those who are ready to listen." "Sir," Alina smiled through her tears, "then maybe now we can listen together." Roland turned to her, his expression softening. "Your mother would have liked that," he said, "and she would have liked him too." Marcus's breath caught, the meaning of those words settling deep in his heart. Days turned into weeks once again. Marcus began working full-time in the mansion's new music academy, a dream Alina and her father started together. They invited underprivileged children to learn, giving them what Marcus once never had, a chance. Every corner of the estate echoed with laughter and melodies instead of silence. One afternoon, Roland entered the hall quietly and watched Marcus teaching a group of children. The sight made him smile for the first time in years. He realized wealth could buy almost anything, except the peace that music had brought to his home. As he turned to leave, he said softly to himself, "Perhaps this was my wife's final lesson." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Marcus played again, this time not for Alina, not for Roland, but for the little boy he once was. The boy who never stopped believing that broken keys could still make beautiful songs. Outside, the wind carried the notes beyond the gates, into the streets where his story had begun, and somewhere, deep in his soul, Marcus knew the song wasn't over. It was only changing its tune. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the mansion. The air was filled with laughter and the sound of young hands learning to play the piano. Marcus stood near the center of the music hall, guiding the students gently. His calm voice blended with the soft hum of melodies echoing through the walls. Every day felt like a blessing, a gift he had once thought impossible. The man who used to polish floors now polished hearts, teaching them to listen to the music inside. But even as he smiled, his eyes often drifted toward Alina. She had become his greatest melody, the one he could never stop hearing. She would often walk in during lessons, carrying books or flowers for the children. The room seemed to glow brighter each time she entered. Sometimes their eyes met across the piano, and in that brief silence, stories were exchanged without a single word. Love had become the quiet rhythm between them, unspoken, yet always there. That evening, after the children left, the mansion grew still again. Marcus stayed behind to close the music hall. Wiping the piano gently, Alina appeared at the doorway, her hair glowing softly in the lamplight. "Still working?" she asked with a playful smile. He turned, his expression gentle. "Just making sure the piano sleeps peacefully." She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "It's strange, isn't it? How the same piano once divided us." Marcus nodded slowly, "And now it binds everything together." There was a long pause, filled with the weight of all that had been left unsaid. Finally, Alina whispered, "Do you ever regret coming back?" Marcus looked into her eyes and said, "Coming back wasn't the hard part, staying was." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because every day I have to remind myself you belong to a world far above mine." Alina's heart trembled. "That world doesn't matter anymore, Marcus." He looked down. "It will always matter to others." She stepped closer. "Then let them talk." Music doesn't ask permission to exist. The silence after that felt alive. She placed her hand over his, their fingers brushing lightly. For the first time, Marcus didn't pull away. He let himself feel the warmth that had always been just out of reach. "I don't care what anyone says," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I care about what I feel, and I feel peace when I'm with you." Marcus closed his eyes, her words sinking deep like notes into his heart. he whispered back. You've always been the song I was meant to play. Just then, the door opened softly. Roland King stood there watching. For a moment no one moved, the air thick with unspoken truth. Marcus quickly stepped back, but Roland lifted a hand, signaling him to stay. I've seen enough of fear and pride, the older man said quietly. If my daughter has found happiness, I won't be the man who steals it from her. Alina's eyes widened. Father, do you mean? Roland smiled faintly. Your mother once told me love is the only music worth listening to. He turned to Marcus. You've reminded me of that every day since you returned. Marcus bowed his head. Unable to find words, Roland continued softly. I won't pretend it's easy to let go of the world's judgments, but I'd rather face them than lose another chance at peace. Alina ran to her father and hugged him tightly. Thank you, she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. Roland smiled and looked at Marcus. You've earned this moment. Don't waste it. That night, the mansion came alive again for the first time. Marcus and Alina played side by side on the grand piano. The melody they created was unlike anything before. Tender, deep and full of unspoken promises. Servants paused to listen. Children gathered outside the hall, and even the stars seemed to stay still. As the final note faded, Marcus turned to her and said softly, This is our melody now. Alina smiled, her eyes shining. Then let it never end. They sat there for a while, surrounded by the quiet hum of the universe, listening. In that moment there were no titles, no walls, no past, only two souls united by music outside. The wind carried their song across the gardens, through the trees, over the walls, and out into the city where Marcus once played for strangers. It was no longer the tune of longing or pain. It was a melody of love, forgiveness and hope. And for the first time in both their lives, the music didn't just change them, it completed them. The evening sky burned in shades of crimson and gold as the mansion prepared for its grand concert. It was the first event of the newly built King Music Academy, a dream born from forgiveness, love, and the magic of sound. Guests arrived from all over the city, businessmen, artists, and children from every street where Marcus once played. The great hall glowed with candlelight, the same piano standing proudly at the center like a symbol of destiny fulfilled. Marcus stood backstage, his heart calm but heavy with memory. This was the night he would play the song that changed everything one last time. Not as a janitor, not as a street musician, but as the man who had lived every note of it. Alina approached him quietly, dressed in white, her eyes shining with pride and love. She whispered, No matter what happens tonight, know that you've already changed all our lives. Marcus smiled softly. Then let me change the air one more time. When the lights dimmed, silence filled the room. Marcus stepped out to the stage, greeted by thunderous applause, but he didn't bow. Instead, he sat at the piano and placed his fingers on the keys. For a moment, the world disappeared, and all that remained was the heartbeat of the music waiting to begin. The first note was gentle, almost fragile. It drifted through the hall like a memory returning home. Each chord carried echoes of his past, the streets, the pain, the laughter of children, and the kindness that saved him. People listened in complete stillness, their breaths caught between emotion and wonder. Halfway through, Alina joined him, her hands gliding onto the keys beside his. Their melody intertwined perfectly, two souls telling one story through music. Roland watched from the front row, his heart swelling with pride and peace. He saw his wife in their harmony, her dream finally alive again. The music rose higher, painting the air with emotion too deep for words. Some guests wiped tears quietly. Others simply closed their eyes to listen. When the final note came, it hung in the air like a promise, soft, trembling, eternal. And then, silence, the kind that only follows greatness. Marcus looked up slowly, meeting the crowd's gaze. No one moved for a full 10 seconds, and then the hall erupted in applause that shook the chandeliers. People stood, cheering, crying, shouting his name, but Marcus only looked at Alina, their eyes speaking what no applause could ever say. After the concert, Roland took the stage. He raised his hand for silence and said, Tonight, you did not just hear music and you heard redemption. You heard love. He turned to Marcus and continued, This man reminded us that true worth is not measured by wealth or power, but by what you give to the world. Then he placed a medal in Marcus's hands, engraved with the words for healing hearts through music. Marcus's eyes filled with tears as he bowed deeply, but his voice remained steady when he said, I only played what life taught me, That pain, when turned into music, can become light for others, the audience applauded again. Moved beyond words, Alina stepped beside him and whispered, "You didn't just play the piano tonight, Marcus. You played the whole world." In the weeks that followed, the song that changed everything spread across the nation. Recorded by children, orchestras, and street performers alike, it became a song of unity, a melody that crossed barriers and spoke to hearts. Marcus and Alina continued their work together, teaching, playing, and building bridges through sound. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, Alina said softly, "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Marcus smiled, with a challenge and a broom in my hand. She laughed, and now, he looked at her lovingly. "Now, I hold something far greater." She tilted her head. "What's that?" he whispered. "A reason to play forever." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying faint notes of their song into the distance. Children's laughter echoed from the academy nearby, the same laughter that once followed Marcus through the streets. The story that began with arrogance had ended in grace. The man who once mopped the floors of wealth now cleaned the dust off people's hearts. And as the golden light of sunset wrapped the mansion once more, Marcus sat at the piano, Alina beside him, their fingers moving in quiet harmony. The melody rose again, tender, timeless, true. It was not just the end of a song, but the beginning of a legacy. A legacy that would remind the world, music born from love never fades. It only finds new hearts to live in.